Cuida to Modern English,
or CTM English,
a podcast of two English teachers who became friends after moving to Chile.
We share real-life entertaining stories of our experiences in Chile in a conversational way, so you can gain exposure to native pacing with the extra support you may not be able to get through the usual forms of media.
So you can learn intermediate to advanced English from anywhere in the world. We also do a short vocabulary review at the end to help the new words stick.
So grab your coffee, wine, or piscola, and let's get started.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are proudly presenting...
Concha tu madre. ¿Qué te pasa, concha tu madre?
Ven acá, concha tu madre.
Concha tu madre. Concha tu madre. Concha tu madre.
Váyanse a la concha de tu madre. Chucha su madre.
Cuida to Modern English.
Welcome back to the podcast. Today, me and Maggie return for part 2 of our theme on intercultural relationships and how they stack up against monocultural ones. From navigating miscommunications to celebrating the beautiful blend of traditions, we dive into the realities of what it's like to love across cultures and languages, and some of the surprising perks of being in an intercultural relationship. Plus, listen closely. You might just pick up some new vocabulary along the way. Happy listening.
There's a lot of minor differences too. I feel like we are from a big consumerist culture, just super consumerist. And I feel like I have the tendency to be more like, let's have a coffee, let's have a treat, let's treat ourselves. And I feel like Jorge has been more frugal.
Yeah.
And we don't buy things that are very expensive, but something that's I don't know, a couple $1,000 pesos or something like that. I find that I was the one to be like, it's okay to sometimes buy yourself something.
Yeah.
I feel like I kind of had that more consumerist mindset, and he was kind of more frugal. I feel like that's another thing that we kind of had a difference with.
Yep, absolutely. I definitely bought a lot of lattes when I first moved to Chile, and then it just got to be too expensive. And I ended up realizing that if I just splurged a little bit on an espresso machine, not a super high quality one, but a $60 one or 60 lucas.
It's now $60.
Right?
Yeah.
It's crazy. But then I would be saving a lot of money in the long run. And so I ended up doing that. And for the first time in my life, I was making lattes at home and drinking my coffee at home. And that sounds so ridiculous. But, when I was here, I had the money to do it. And so I just didn't even think about it, It was too convenient.
I think we have less stuff paid for by the government, less healthcare and I don't know, FONASA. But we do have more disposable income that people tend to buy themselves food. Although I will say here in Chile, some of the upper middle class families will have nana or someone that is a housekeeper that cooks for them. People who can afford it. Obviously, a lot of people can't afford that either. But people who can afford to not cook all their meals themselves will have someone come to the house to prepare food for them. And for me, that was surprising because I was like, someone privately cooking for you feels like it would be really expensive. That's kind of seems like a huge luxury. But then I was putting it into perspective, thinking of I don't know, people that I know from the US who make enough disposable income, and what they do is they buy food outside of the house a lot. So they'll buy takeout or they'll go to restaurants more often. And I realized just that's probably even more expensive than having a Chilean nana come to your house to cook, which is very interesting because it's not typical at all that you would have a private cook. That's maybe the Kardashians have that. I don't know.
I know.
But people spend their money on food outside the house.
Yeah, actually, when I worked as a software developer for 6 months, remotely in Chile, and it was the first time there and the only time that I actually could breathe and had excess money. And so I started, speaking of intercultural dating, I was very tired of cooking and cleaning. And
I was working like 14-hour days trying to be good at my job so that they wouldn't fire me because it was my first software dev job. So I ended up hiring a house cleaner. And when I asked people like, what's the normal rate for a house cleaner here? I was so shocked because here in the US, for 2 to 3 hours of cleaning, it costs roughly around, I guess, maybe 130 lucas. Whereas it was for me, I just paid, I think, 23 lucas. I would always give her a pretty big tip because I felt terrible for only giving her 23 lucas. I was like, that's awful. How do you live? So I would end up giving her a lot extra. And then when I lost my job, I felt really terrible because I had to let her go. But it was a great luxury to have that.
Definitely.
If you have a house cleaner here, people are like, whoa, dang, you're rich.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because like some stuff with Chile and the US is the same price.
Yeah.
Basically, like even going to restaurants, I find that some things like having a gym membership or going to restaurants, some things are very similarly priced.
Yeah.
But some things are randomly way cheaper in Chile. And I find it's usually like services. Like I got my hair cut. I paid like 30,000 or something.
Yeah.
I don't remember, maybe 35,000. And I was like, holy shit, that's like really cheap.
I know.
Jorge was like, that's so expensive.
I know, but we pay, I don't get my hair done very often. Like I'm talking like at least once every 2 years.
Yeah, me neither. But it's because of this.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Because what I do is I get it cut, I get it colored and styled or whatever. But it ends up costing, I'm not even kidding, $300 after, because you have to tip them, which is another difference. Because I guess you don't, I don't know. Some people in Chile told me that you don't tip the hairstylist. Some people did. So I don't know what the actual standard is.
I've heard that people usually don't, but maybe it's becoming more of a thing. I don't know.
Yeah. So $300 is probably, I don't know, roughly around 260 lucas.
No, it's like 1 luca is $1. That's what I meant. Like 1,000 pesos is like $1. Yeah.
Okay. Well, in that case, then it would be 300 lucas.
Yeah.
Which is insane.
That is definitely. It's specifically services and like tattoos also. I got a tattoo from our friend Constanza and I thought to tip her and she was like, usually people don't do that.
Really?
Yeah, people usually don't give a tip for tattoos.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
That's so crazy.
So I think that's something that's interesting. But then on the other hand, I don't know, like a burger or buying something, it's often the same price or like clothes. Yeah.
I will say technology down there is so ridiculously expensive. I don't know how anybody affords technology down there just because it's all imported.
Yeah.
They have to pay the importation fees, the shipping fees, and then the VAT and all of that stuff. When I lived there, I had to get a laptop for software development. And I remember like shopping around and I could not find even a bottom of the line like decent computer for less than $1,300.
Oh, wow.
Which is 1,300 lucas. So I remember I got on Amazon and I found the exact same model of computer for roughly around $500, 500 lucas. And I had it shipped to Chile and paid the, taxes and custom and all that stuff. And it ended up being $800. So I literally imported it myself and paid $400 less.
Wow.
It was insane. Like laptops there are crazy. Yeah. And then I realized why everybody is so obsessed with hiding their phones when they're walking. Because in the US, if we lose a phone, all we have to do is go to a phone company and say, I want 2 years of service with your company, and they basically give you a free phone. And you can also pay for insurance that covers theft. And it's like, I don't know, $10 extra or something. Whereas in Chile, they don't offer that. And so you have to pay for the full price of the phone, which is insane. And you don't have insurance for the phone, I don't think. I don't think that's a thing there.
Yeah, I
So,
haven't heard of it. Yeah.
yeah. So losing your phone is like a big deal there as opposed to in the US.
I also think the type of crime is different too, because here people have a tendency to go for the phone. That is what people want more than anything, more than the people who are stealing stuff, more than the wallet. And I find in the US, it's more typical that someone would go after your wallet and want your credit card and like steal your credit card more than stealing your phone.
Yeah. Or just shoot you. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I also think like they would just have a gun and like it doesn't matter if your phone's in your hand or where it is, you have to give it to them. So
I will say it's really funny because I have so many Chilean friends that say like, oh, I would never want to visit the US. And I'm like, why? And they're like, because you might get shot. And it's like, okay, it's not like that. I mean, like, you know, the news and the movies, they make it so dramatic. And, you know, it can be very rough depending on where you are. But I don't walk around in fear that somebody's going to shoot me. Like, I mean, maybe I should. It does kind of
scare me though. The mass shooting stuff does scare me because it's like you could randomly be like doing in a mall. I don't like you could be in a place. It's not predictable. I find that is also what's scary because it's you could be in a place that seems like really safe.
Right. Right. Yeah. It's pretty crazy. Okay, so another thing that we noticed is kind of how you adapt to other people's culture, and then like you adapt to your partner's culture and they adapt to yours in a way. And a really good example of that I didn't even know, like the first year that I was in Chile, I was still like smiling at people on the street when they would walk by, and you open doors for people, you know, and maybe that's just like a Midwestern thing here. But in my state, that is a huge culture thing. That's everybody does it. Like, in fact, if you don't smile back at somebody, it means you're a psycho and like you're dangerous. Whereas it was like, I didn't find out. They told me like a whole year after I'd been there, oh, by the way, like, don't smile at random people because you look like a psycho.
That's so funny.
I know, and I was so embarrassed, but like, and then I had like all these flashbacks of people looking at me like, what a crazy person.
Oh my God, you're like, everything makes sense now.
Yeah. So I adapted to not doing that. And I actually really liked it. And then I came back to the States and I was sitting in a cafe with a friend of mine and we were talking. And this lady walks around the corner and she's like looking at us and smiles. And she's like, good morning. And I was like, what? A psycho. Yeah.
What is wrong with you?
Right? And it's like totally normal here. But I guess I just had adapted so much to the Chilean culture in that sense that it was really quite interesting. I immediately started laughing. I was like, oh God.
I get what you're saying too, because when my friends were visiting me from the US and we were taking the micro, this guy gets on and he's like trying to sell keychains or something. There's always people like selling stuff on the micro. And in the past, like, I just learned it's good manners. You always like look at people when they're talking to you, even if it's I don't know, like, it can be a person that lives on the street, like any person. If they're just talking to you, you look at them and you try to look nice and smile. My friends, I look over at them and they're like giving this guy their undivided attention. And he's like, I can see him and they're both just like bright-eyed looking at him while he's like giving this long speech about his keychains. And I whispered to them like, guys, just trust me. Don't look at him. And I was like, I used to do that too. Like, I used to look at people because obviously, like, I don't know, we learned to like just look at people when they're speaking to you. But I was like, if you don't want to buy what he's selling, do not look at him. Just don't do it. Like, it will open up a Pandora's box of way more problems for you.
Yes, absolutely. So, that is so funny.
Yeah.
Guys.
It's like, guys, trust me. Don't look
Don't
at
do it. Don't do it. I know it's tempting. Oh my God. I just remember it. That just reminds me of when I was on the metro and there was a Mormon and, he was speaking in English to somebody and he looks at me and I can tell that he wanted to say hi. And I thought to myself, I am not going to speak English at all, ever on this train. I was like, I'm just going to speak Spanish if I have to.
We have that with Jorge whenever we see there's like, because I think that's another thing that's like two opposite sides of the spectrum between like the US and Chile is like, I find that Chileans take up very little space.
Mm-hmm.
Like people tend to be more reserved. I think that people don't blast music as much as people from other countries. Like they try to take up like very little space. And I find that gringos, we are very comfortable taking up more space, without realizing it, like speaking louder.
Right.
Just kind of like, I don't know. I just find that we take up more space.
Yeah, I put my backpack on and it was like I could have put it in front of me and then just been in one seat, but it hung over into the other seat. And my Chilean friends were laughing and they were like, "Oh, gringa."
You're like taking up all the space.
Yeah. I was thinking the opposite of that or the reverse, how Adolfo picked up my cultural differences.
Mm-hmm.
We eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And our dinners tend to be larger, whereas the lunches tend to be larger in Chile. And then, a lot of times Chileans might skip dinner and just go straight to once. And so that was really hard for me when I first moved there because
it's hard to adapt. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's like, I'm starving. What?
Yeah, like you have to eat a bunch of food at like 2:30 p.m.
Yeah, and that's so weird because it's in the middle of the day. Like for me, that's so weird. But yeah, so because I was cooking in the house, anyway, there's a good bicultural difference. So I would be cooking just like I normally would. So breakfast, lunch, and dinner. He ended up liking it that way and preferred it that way. And so he adjusted to the American culture in that way.
That's interesting. Yeah, I feel like that it is really hard to get on a different eating schedule. But I do like eating something a little bit more hearty than just like a piece of bread before. Like I tend to be too hungry for that.
Yeah.
Before going to sleep. It's also really hard for me because I lived with a Chilean mom when I was studying a semester. So in that sense, I needed to be on her schedule, whereas now I can do whatever I want.
Yeah.
But at that time, I was eating what she prepared and it would just be so much food at like 2:30 and I usually don't eat that much in one sitting.
Yeah.
But if I didn't eat as much as I could, I would be like completely starving and without food for the rest of the day.
Yeah.
So I had to just like binge eat at like 3 p.m. and then would go out and drink for like 5 hours and be completely not okay.
Yeah. No kidding.
I didn't eat dinner.
Yeah. I always bought like extra protein bars because of that. And I was just like, I'm pre-diabetic. So if I don't eat, I get really, really crabby and, sick feeling. And so I would always have like extra bars on me or whatever, just in case. But I was always shocked by how little Chileans eat for breakfast. It's like a yogurt and with some fruit and coffee, and that's it. And I'm like, man, I need like a big fat omelet with 50,000 things in it. Like you got ham, spinach, onions, mushrooms, cheese, like broccoli. I don't even know, like just whatever you got, throw it in there. Like pepperonis. I don't know. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, like I'm so used to huge breakfast. I love breakfast. So having that like little teeny cartons of yogurt.
Yeah.
Yeah. Give me the big thing and I'll eat half of it in one sitting.
That really reminds me that eating culture, I think that Jorge has adapted a lot to my eating, which is I'm very experimental,
Mhm.
or I'll eat stuff from a lot of different, like I'll eat Asian food, Indian food, like I'll
Mhm.
invent something. I'll put stuff in a combination that is not that usual, or eat sweet and salty things.
Yeah.
And I find that in Chile, people are very obviously there's people that are not like this. There's exceptions to everything, but I find that people are very safe with their food.
Yeah.
Even if you go to like the spice section in the store, it's like everything's like cumin or oregano.
Yeah.
Like there are the flavors of chips. Like now
Yeah.
there's more spicy chips, but in the past, like that wasn't the case. And
Yeah.
I find people are very like safe and non-experimental with their food. And even like when they do eat sushi, it's like cream cheese and avocado and chicken, and when I do talk to Chileans about the stuff that I like to eat or prepare, they get kind of like, oh, like
Yeah.
I wouldn't try that. Like I will put raisins and nuts in my salad,
Yeah.
or I will eat stuff that's like sweet and salty, or
Mhm.
combine peanut butter with stuff. And people are
Yeah.
like not willing to try that.
Yeah, I remember I made my first July 4th there. I made a bunch of American dishes for everybody, and we had an asado. And I made celery with peanut butter, which is a totally normal snack here for Americans.
Ants on a log.
Ants on
right?
a log, right? So ants on a log is when you put the celery with peanut butter, and then you put the raisins on top, right? I don't do the raisins, but anyway, so I made this for them, and because they really thought it was disgusting and they wanted to try it. I was like, okay, because I kept saying like, it's delicious. What is wrong with you? Like, it's so good, And then so I created it for them, and just the extreme differences between their reactions when they ate it was so funny, because some of them would eat it and you can tell that it's a little, it just gets stuck in your mouth, and so they'd be like, I was like, oh my God. Tranqui. And then others would be like, oh, this is disgusting. And then others would be like, oh, actually, this is kind of good, And I'm like,
it's not as bad as I thought.
Right.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, are you just being nice, or do you actually think that? I don't know. But yeah, it was just such a vast difference in reactions.
That's hilarious. But I find it, I don't know, I really like it because I find that like when we go out, if we eat something, I usually choose like the weirdest or more like interesting thing on the menu. Because I'm like, if I'm going to buy food, I want it to be something I couldn't make myself.
Yeah.
Like I want it to be something like unique. And Jorge usually chooses like the safe, like good option.
Yeah.
And we share. And so like his is good too, but I feel like he's like, oh, actually what you ordered is like really good. And I would not have ordered that myself.
Yeah.
So it's like interesting. Like, oh, I would never have tried this if you didn't tell me about it.
Yeah. Super interesting. Oh, communication differences. Yeah. So here, I think it's starting to get more popular, but not a lot of people have WhatsApp.
Yeah.
And we just use regular text messages. But I love WhatsApp because it has way more features. And so I try to get my friends on it here. I'm like, please start using this. But yeah, people tend to send voice messages more than here in the States. I don't know why.
Yeah, I still kind of have it. Sometimes when people send me a lot of voice messages, sometimes I will respond with text.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know why. I feel like sometimes we don't have like the custom of like recording your voice.
Yeah.
It just like didn't become a thing in the States.
Yeah. I think we might be slightly insecure about our voices or something. I don't know.
But I do it now more because it's like very convenient when you need to explain something really fast.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I cannot even tell you how many voice messages I've deleted before sending because I was speaking in Spanish, and I just completely mess up the grammar or something, and I'm like, dang it, I start over.
Yeah, I also find that like it's usually in Spanish where I feel like, oh, I have to record myself.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard to hear your own voice in a foreign language because you're like, okay, I know that this sounds really stupid. Like,
yeah, definitely.
But, it's just part of the process.
It is.
Good time.
It's a good way to practice too, actually.
Yeah, it
It's
really
good
is.
way.
Because then you can definitely like hear. For me, I really tend to miss when I'm using like a RE at the beginning of words. I tend to say re instead of ray. You know? And I catch myself doing it all the time, and I'm like, dang it.
Yeah, that is interesting. Also, yeah, I feel like the WhatsApp is different. The sending a voice message is different. I also feel like, I don't know. I think like here, I don't know if this is a me thing, but I feel like people are more forward with asking me for my Instagram. Like when I meet to like be friends, people are like, oh, let me add you on Instagram.
Yeah.
Maybe. But I don't know if that's only I have a tendency to generalize my own personal experience to a cultural difference.
Right. So one of the biggest cultural differences, I would say, I went dancing with a friend. And we danced until like 5:30 in the morning. And then when we were leaving the club, they asked me, do you want to go back to your other friend's house or do you want to come back to mine? It doesn't matter. And I was like, it is 5:30 in the morning. My friend lives an hour away. There's no way I'm going to be able to get back there. Like, if it's cool, I'll just stay at your place. And so this is a friend of an opposite gender. And so
I was going to say, it's important to note that this friend is a man.
Yes. And so I stayed over the night, but nothing happened. We just talked. And in the morning, it was like, I don't know, 10:30 or something. And we were sitting there eating breakfast. And I hear some keys jingling in the hallway. And all of a sudden, you see this like look of dread just fall over his face. And he's like, I'm so sorry. And like before he can get any other words out, there's somebody getting into the apartment who obviously has keys. And I'm like, who the heck could this be? And this lady opens the door and it turns out that it's his mother. And you know, even though nothing happened, it looked really bad.
Yeah, well, yeah, like you don't expect to do like a walk of shame situation where you're coming home from the club and like to meet the mom,
Right.
the person who's out to stay at.
Right. So to give some context, in the US, meeting your like partner's parents, that usually doesn't happen for at least 6 months to if not longer. You know, it's like it's a very serious next step for us. Whereas I feel like in Chile and maybe other Latin countries, it's not a big deal. It's just like, okay.
I don't know. I've had some friends here where they introduce their family to their partner like 2 weeks in.
Exactly.
It's like you kind of do it first before seeing if the relationship works.
Yeah.
Whereas I'm like, I'm going to make sure that actually I like you before I introduce you to my family because we don't have the emotional vulnerability to be introducing every single person that I ever date to you guys. But
yeah, so it was really... For me, that was a super awkward situation because I was like, oh, hi, nice. And I knew what it looked like, you know? And so I was like, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. I'm this like random show in your son's apartment.
Right? I was like, oh my God. And anyway, so he asked his mom to go get us a Gatorade or something because, you know, we were hungover and everything. And so she's like, okay. And like goes downstairs and gets us a Gatorade. And while she's gone, you know, he's just like super apologetic. Like, I'm so sorry. Like, and I'm like, no, it's fine. Because like in my head, I'm like, okay, that is something cultural. And so it doesn't bother me. It's like we were talking about the red flags, you know, and it's like, okay, your mom has keys to your apartment. Like, I feel like that's, I don't know if it's normal, but it's definitely not normal.
Yeah, definitely. That it is something cultural. Like after maybe your first week in Chile, you would be like, what just happened?
Yeah.
But maybe after living here for a couple of years, you were kind of like, that's not that crazy.
Right. You're right. It's like
people are closer with their families.
Yeah.
Here.
I will say it was really interesting because when she got back, she started making us lunch and we were watching TV and this temblor, but it was temblor with the epicenter that was in Providencia. And so I was in Quinta Normal at the time. And so because the epicenter was so close, it seemed a lot stronger than normal. It was the strongest one I was in there. And, the saying goes that if a Chilean freaks out, you need to freak out and it's too late. Or if a Chilean isn't freaking out, you have no reason to freak out, right? So always watch the Chileans and see what they're doing. And so I was... his mom was freaking out. And for the first time, I don't have hanging lights in my apartment, so I never saw the swinging lights thing. And he definitely had swinging lights in his apartment, and so the light was just whacking the ceiling, right and left, whack, whack, whack. And I was like, oh my god! And then she starts freaking out big time, and I just automatically grab his arm so tight, and I'm freaking out. And it's so funny because people always make fun of gringos for freaking out in the earthquakes there, but I normally didn't. I normally would just be oh, okay, you get used to them, and it's another temblor or whatever. But I felt so embarrassed because that was the first time that they ever saw me in a temblor, and I was freaking out because she was freaking out, and I was oh my god, Chilean is freaking out. We're
reading her energy and feeding off of it.
We're all dead.
Yeah. That's funny. That's a big difference too, the earthquake.
Yeah.
That's really funny. I do feel like that is also cultural that she started making you guys lunch.
Yep.
Could never be my mom.
No.
Could not imagine that happen.
Nope. Not at all.
That's so funny. Hey there, language learners. If you're enjoying the podcast and want to support what we're doing, you can check out our Patreon at patreon.com/ctmenglish. We offer free episode transcripts to all Patreon members, so you can follow along and learn even more. We also have a $1 paid tier if you want to support the show and get a member shout out in our future episodes. And for just $5 a month, you'll get exclusive bonus content, 3 to 4 pieces of unfiltered audio or video every month that you won't hear anywhere else. So head over to patreon.com/ctmenglish to see all the ways you can support us and get extra content. Thanks so much.
So, Maggie.
Yeah.
What do you think about gender roles in Chile versus the US?
That's a good question. It's interesting. I feel like there's a lot of paradox there, right? So I feel like there's definitely machismo in Chile. And I find that it's a lot stronger with the older generations versus the younger generations. It's really different to talk to. Most of the times that I've experienced someone being creepy to me, it's been an older man in Chile.
Yep.
So that's a thing. But I don't know. It's interesting because I find that there is kind of an expectation for women to do more and take care of more things, especially in the house in Chile, just considering the mom is strong and takes care of the kids, and if she's not doing all of the household things like cooking and cleaning, there's a different woman who's hired to help with that, it's very women taking care of those sort of things.
Yeah.
And that's very strong. I noticed that when I met my husband's family and his grandma asked me to help in the kitchen when I went over. And I noticed that the men were not expected to do anything. And I was cutting cabbage, which is fine. I'm fine to help. I like cooking too, but it was definitely oh, this is a gender dynamic.
Yeah, I remember one asado, not just one asado, but many, where the women would put the food on trays and then walk around like waitresses and serve everybody. And I felt so awkward because, the men were just sitting there drinking beers and having a good time and talking. And I'm like, dude, get up and go help. Like, what are you doing, you lazy piece of shit? No.
Yeah. But yeah, which I recognize, like, it definitely also happened. Like in the US, we also have like sexist gender roles where men are like watching the football game and like,
give me a beer.
Yeah, like we have that too. So that's why it's like, it is kind of hard to analyze, you know, like where does it end like in a cultural way?
Yeah.
But I will say too that like at the same time, something else that I've noticed is that like I needed to stop being so friendly to men in Chile because gringo men in general tend to be really cold. Even the ones that are creepy, even if you're like really nice and smiley and stuff, it's kind of part of our culture to, I think, be like overly smiley as a woman.
Yeah.
And coming here, I noticed that a lot of Chilean women are really kind of used to and good at setting boundaries with men.
Oh, yeah.
Like they don't act overly sweet to them. They kind of are like, yeah, no, I'm not going to deal with your shit. Like they kind of like put up a barrier with men. And I find that it took me a while to get to the point where I was doing that because I kind of was smiling at people and someone told me when you do that, it's like you're leaving the door open for anyone to come in.
Yeah.
And I was like, I didn't realize I was doing that. I thought I was just being nice, but you're right.
Yeah, I will say I realized that big time when I went dancing in Santiago. And, you know, our friend Anna had to step in a situation where the man was getting very physical with me. And, you know, she was like, well, if you dance like that, that's what's going to happen. And I was like, what are you talking about? Dance like that? And it's interesting because here in the States, if you go to a club and you're dancing sexy, like you're just having fun, and there's always going to be the creepers, but usually men don't take that as an invitation to do actual physical things. And that happened. And so, you know, I had to have her step in, and it was so interesting because they are very much more like, oh, hell no. And, you know, we were dancing with a friend of hers that's Cuban. And apparently they told me later that like Cubans are more open to things like that. And they say, I don't know if that's real or not, but that's what I was told. And it was funny because the friend was talking to me and she was like, hey, if that's what you want, you know, do it, you know? And I was like, no, that's not what I want. Like,
I wasn't like, hey man, come on. Like you were just dancing. You were like, men, come touch me.
Right.
Like that wasn't your objective. Yeah.
Right. It was like, I'm just having fun. Like, and this is the only way I know how to dance. You know, dancing isn't really a thing here. Like to get a man to go dancing is like pulling teeth here.
Yeah. Gringo men are not, I don't know if it's that they're not good dancers or they just don't want to. They're not
insecure.
Like a risk.
They're insecure.
It's insecurity. Like there's not a risk that they'll come over and like harass you because they're too insecure to do that. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And they're like, I don't know how to do that. I'm going to avoid it instead of flirting. But I guess if you're in a culture where dancing is very prevalent, like maybe, and like I just remember asking a friend to go dancing and I was shocked when they were like, yeah, sure. And I was like, what? Really? That was so easy.
Yeah, it's really interesting that I feel like for me, that's something that I've definitely had to learn of like being, I don't know, just, yeah, it goes with the not smiling at everyone, not opening the door for everyone, like being a little bit more reserved up front to avoid some of these situations was kind of something I had to learn.
Yeah. I guess it's interesting because in a way we had to learn to be colder in public. And yet all I hear from Chileans about Americans is that we're so cold. And it's like, I see why. But in the same sense, there are moments where in this context where maybe they're a little bit colder, but for good reason.
Yeah. You know what I think it is? So I heard One time Jorge told me this story of like a professor that he had who was from Germany. And she said that she was on an airplane for like 9 hours and the person next to her was from the United States. And they had a conversation like the whole flight for the 9 hours.
God.
They were like really getting to know each other. And then at the end of the flight, I guess the cultural difference came out that if you're German and you really open up to someone and talk about all of these personal things, the idea is that, oh, we're kind of like friends. You only really do that with someone that you're friends with. Versus the person from the United States was kind of like, okay, bye, have a good life, and never talk to them again. The German was kind of like waiting, okay, we're friends now, let's exchange information. And the person from the US had this kind of like, okay, we're done here. It's really hard to explain. It's like, on one hand, we're more friendly, but on the other hand, we have less emotional vulnerability with certain things, like when it comes to actually being friends. So that it's kind of hard to describe.
Right? It's like we think more things are super awkward and we're just like, that's super interesting.
Yeah, it is like a paradox here.
Yeah. Okay, so what kind of advice do you have for surviving intercultural relationships?
Ooh, that's a good one. I feel like one part of it is just kind of the ability to listen and learn from the other person. I feel like that's always really important. I think that that's kind of like how my relationship has been able to work, I think. It's like using our differences to learn from each other. And sometimes in the moment, you don't really understand, and it can lead to an argument, but kind of over time, continuing to try to see from the other person's perspective and just see it as like, it can be funny or a point to learn from.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be something like, oh, why are you like this? You know, like you can have a more positive view of the difference.
Right. And being culturally sensitive and not trying to change them to fit your culture, you know, and just accepting like, oh, that's part of their culture. Like, I'm trying to think of an example of that. I guess, okay, this is a good example. If we didn't go over to his parents' house every 2 weeks, they would start wondering what was going on, what was wrong, you know, like, did we do something to offend you or something like that? Whereas like here, like if I was working and had my own life going on, I would probably only see my parents like once every 3 months or once every 6 months, even sometimes. And so that was really difficult thing for me at first. It was like, okay, are we going over there every freaking weekend? Like, when do we get a weekend to ourselves? Like, you know, and so it kind of made me mad at first, but then I was like, you know what, this is a cultural thing, and I might not understand it now, but I need to keep an open mind. And we, you know, eventually I really liked his family, and so it was fun to go over there, and it was good interaction because I was so locked up in the apartment. So I actually started to look forward to it. But man, at first I was like, this needs to be like, we need more distance. And a lot of times, like, we would be doing something or planning something, and his mom might call and say, hey, I'm at the grocery store and I need a ride home. And he would drop everything and go pick his mom up and take her home. And, you know, she lived like 2 blocks from the grocery store. And so for me, I would be like, can't you just tell her to go get an Uber? Like, why are you the Uber? Like, we are busy right now. We are doing something. You need to set boundaries. But like, I also never really quite said it like that because I was like, okay, this is definitely a cultural difference. And I have to accept that that's the way it is.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's okay to like recognize the difference and then just see like, okay, this is the difference. But obviously to an extent you do need to compromise, you know, like you do need to meet in the middle.
And to clarify, compromise is not compromiso.
It is not. It is like llegar a un acuerdo, like to meet in the middle, to give up part of
exactly
a little bit what you are believing. We had, I think also, I mean, I'm really happy with the fact that I feel like Jorge also has really kept an open mind in our relationship. I remember when he first visited me in Chicago, I was living with a couple of friends who are queer. And a lot of my friends at that time also were like trans and queer and like used they, them pronouns, or used like pronouns that were not the ones they were assigned at birth. And I know that he was a little bit nervous to meet my friends just because it's different in Spanish and English to be inclusive of other people. It just looks different. And I think he just didn't want to feel like he was offending someone, you know? But I feel like he realized that it was actually, first of all, easier than it looked to to interact with these people and kind of see them for who they are. And so I feel like he was able to see that it was actually easier than he thought to do this and to be inclusive, and also that people were not going to be mean to him, you know, or be like super offended. And it worked out really well. And now to this day, a lot of those people are still some of his closest friends too. So I feel like it worked out for the fact that he was able to keep that open mind and to be willing to learn, you know, worked out for the better.
But I will say my ex was always very respectful of my beliefs when it came to homosexuality and stuff, as far as externally. So he would never say anything mean or derogatory, even though it was very obvious that he still had that machismo kind of ignorance when it comes to homosexuality. And so I think in that case, maybe that was a little compromise for him.
Yeah. Compromise it. I feel like sometimes people aren't ready to make the big compromise that they kind of start where they're at.
Yeah. Absolutely. And definitely, I would say, I mean, I have a sense of humor about most things anyway. So I would say that's definitely important to be able to laugh at yourselves, you know, and especially when you recognize that, oh, this is just a cultural difference that we're fighting over, and being willing to learn. Yeah.
Yeah, and like look back and see this is how far we've come. Like, I don't know. I think that sometimes like 4 years ago, I really didn't understand this thing, but now I'm a different person than I was.
Sure. It's interesting how much I've changed since living in a foreign country, you know, just in general.
Yeah. And you learn so much about your own culture too. I think a lot of the times you think that everyone is a certain way because you grow up in your country. And then you're like, oh, that was a learned cultural behavior. Not everyone is like that. And then you see how that behavior doesn't need to be a given. And it can actually be something that you choose to do or to not do.
Exactly.
So that's also what's cool is like the more cultures you get to know, the more options you have for
like seeing. I don't like smiling at people anymore.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, I'm going to choose to be an optimist gringo, a delusional optimist gringo, but my exterior is going to be not smiling at you.
Yep, pretty much.
And have the confidence of a Chilean woman.
I definitely hug a lot more. I was not a huggy person. I hated hugging before I moved to Chile. Like, especially, like, I would hug people that I was really close with, like my best friends, but just a random acquaintance, I would feel so uncomfortable getting hugged because I would never give them
getting hugged. You're like the victim of the hug, like receiving a hug.
And I mean, I would reciprocate, but it was always just super awkward for me. I don't know why, but then, going to Chile and being greeted every single time, and really people love to hug a lot more. And so it was different for me there because I was more open-minded to it, I think, and because it's a cultural difference. And so then coming back, I actually had a little bit of reverse culture shock with somebody that I hugged, and I was just introduced to them, and they were like, what are you doing? And I was like, I don't know what I'm doing.
You're like, sorry, I'm on autopilot. My bad. Oh yeah, I feel like we referenced that in episode 1. If you guys remember.
Yeah, probably. Yep.
And just words of affirmation. I think people are just a little bit more comfortable with showing love to friends and significant others in a way, because a lot of times when I'll go out with a Chilean friend here, they'll send me a message after that's like, thank you so much for spending time with me. I really had a great time.
Yeah.
Like you're a great friend to me. Like that will happen,
Yeah.
when I hang out with people, which is so nice because I tend to have a little bit of social anxiety sometimes after hanging out with people. And so just to get that affirmation of like, hey, just to let you know, like I had an amazing time hanging out with you. And I've started being more like emotional with some of my US friends. And I think they really appreciate it, but I definitely got it from here and not from the US.
It's super interesting because they're, friends will say, I love you all the time, like te quiero in that friendly sense. But here, I mean, I've been friends with people for over 10 years and it's still super awkward to say, I love you, right?
Yeah. I guess also because we don't have that in-between word, It's like either I like you or te amo. It's like I like you or I love you.
We don't have te quiero. So and like the first time that person I wasn't dating, man, said te quiero, I was always like, are you saying that you love me? Like that meant te amo to me. And I was like, oh, that's kind of awkward.
You're like, I reject you. And they're like, no, well, I meant it as friends.
I was like, oh, okay. I guess that's okay.
That's so funny.
So anyway.
I'm so curious, personally, if anyone has any interesting anecdotes or observations about intercultural dating, if you guys have dated someone from another country and would like to share it with us. I'd be very interested to hear that. So let us know and we'll definitely read those and laugh at them.
Or say, oh, yeah.
Yeah. See you in the next one.
Yes. Ciao for now.
Hello, listeners. It is now time for our vocabulary segment, so get ready to review.
The first one we had is to splurge. To splurge is to spend money freely or extravagantly, often on something unnecessary or indulgent. So, for example, I just splurged a little bit on an espresso machine, which we talked about in the episode.
Correction. That is not unnecessary or indulgent.
Yeah, actually. So in this case, maybe it wasn't a splurge because it was necessary for life, for survival.
Awesome. The next one was in the long run. The definition of it is basically over a long period of time or eventually. It's kind of like the bigger picture. So, for example, we said, but then I would be saving a lot of money in the long run.
Exactly. So that kind of goes together with splurge. So it's like I splurged on an espresso machine so that I would save money in the long run. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So the next one is walk of shame. The experience of going home the morning after spending the night out, often implying embarrassment. For example, Maggie said when talking about my situation with my friend, you don't expect to do a walk of shame situation and meet the mom.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. It's like when you slept in the clothes from the party the night before and you're like walking down the street and you accidentally see your neighbor or something.
Yeah, and they see your like makeup all running and your hair is all, and you just gotta like put your hoodie over
exactly. it. Then we also had to binge eat. So to binge anything is to do it in a really big quantity in a short amount of time. So to binge eat is to eat a large quantity of food in a short period of time. So when I was talking about getting used to the eating habits in Chile with my host mom, and I basically was starving all day, except she would feed me a bunch of food at 3 p.m. I said I just had to binge eat at 3 p.m. So eating a lot of food because I wasn't going to get fed later. You could also binge watch a series. So if you watch a bunch of episodes of a series in one weekend, that would be binge watching.
Mm-hmm. I just binge watch
Demon Slayer.
Ooh, nice. Did you like it?
Yeah, it was really good. I was surprised. I was like, oh, great. Here we go. Anime. But I'm actually getting into anime a little bit. I don't know.
Yeah, you're in touch with your inner otaku side.
Yeah, for real. It's kind of fun. Okay. The next one is emotional vulnerability. The definition is basically the willingness to be open about one's feelings, especially when there is a risk of being hurt emotionally. For example, we said we don't have the emotional vulnerability to be introducing every person we meet. Oh, I think we were talking about like introducing them to our parents and family.
Yeah, I think like in the United States, we don't tend to have the same level of emotional vulnerability as in Latin American countries, I would say.
Yeah, at least in the family regard.
So this is an interesting one, which probably a lot of people have heard before, which is boundaries. Boundaries are limits a person sets in relationships to protect their well-being. And it's common to use this word with sets, like to set boundaries. I find that a lot of Spanish speakers will ask me what this means, and I basically say kind of personal limits. But in Spanish, there's just the one word, límites. And so people are like, yeah, but why is there another word for boundaries? So thinking about it, I guess I would say that boundaries is more used in this sort of psychological way when talking about relationships. Or what would you say is, for you, is there a difference between boundaries and limits?
Yeah, I mean, it's very nuanced, of course, but I feel like setting limits is more talking for us anyway. I feel like the word limit is usually related more to quantity of items, like limiting your amount of gum that you chew every day, or I don't know, maybe that's the example I thought.
You've gum addict.
I may have a problem. Okay, but that's how I quit smoking 5 years ago, so I'm not even ashamed.
Yeah. No, you shouldn't be ashamed.
It is pretty bad though. Anyway, but when it comes to boundaries, it's more like you would think the psychological boundaries usually.
Yeah, definitely. It's kind of like, where do I end and where do you begin kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, we also use boundaries for like boundaries of property, like, you know, the boundaries of my house or where I live, the boundaries of my property stop in this county or whatever. But usually it's either that or the like psychological.
Yeah,
sense.
definitely. That's a good way to think of it.
The next one is reserved. It means that you're slow to show emotions or express opinions, quiet and restrained. So, for example, we said like being a little bit more reserved up front to avoid some situation.
And after that, there's take up space. And in a physical way, this phrasal verb to take up is to occupy. So it's to occupy physical or social space. But it could also be used not only in the literal way, but to mean how noticeable or dominant someone is. So, for instance, I said that I find that gringos, we are very comfortable taking up more space. So kind of being louder and more, I don't know, I guess comfortable dominating an environment, like a social situation. That would be taking up space.
Yeah, people think that I take up space because I don't know, laugh really loud or something like that. But it's not that I'm intentionally taking up that space. It's just that I'm just allowing myself to be free and express myself, which I guess other people could say is taking up space.
I think, yeah, I feel like that's something that is really valuable. But then there's also the people that are like very constrained and they get triggered when others take up space because they feel like they can't. I feel like that also happens.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, the next one is pulling teeth. And it's basically a metaphor for something that's very difficult to do or get someone to do, often used humorously. So, for example, I said, like, to get a man to go dancing is like pulling teeth here in the US.
That's true. It's like, yeah, it's like imagine your child and you're like, come on, let me get your tooth out of your mouth. And they're like, no.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
This was a good one. I think you said it, crabby. So to be crabby is to be irritable or in a bad mood. For instance, if I don't eat, I get really crabby. It's similar to cranky, I would say, is a good synonym.
I think there's a good dicho in Chile that is like, tienes pulgas? Tienes pulgas malas or something?
Yeah,
right?
I don't remember how it is.
Yeah, something like that. But it basically means you're crabby.
You're crabby. You woke up on the wrong side of the bed. Yeah.
Ooh, there's another one. That's a good one. Okay. The next one is to come off as. It means to appear or seem in a certain way, often unintentionally. For example, we said, I didn't realize I was doing that. I thought I was just being nice, but you're right. I came off as inviting.
Yeah, that's a good one. Because I feel like a lot of people know the word come and they know the word off. But then like when it comes to using phrasal verbs, they don't really use them that much.
Yeah, that's tricky. You could say she comes off as a prima donna.
Yeah. How would you explain a prima donna? It's like you open the door for more.
I know, right? I opened the can of worms. Oh my God, so many
Maybe
details.
like a diva, kind of?
Yeah, like a diva.
So the next one, when Layla was talking about, I think you were talking about the person that used to clean your house. And you said, I had to let her go when I lost my job. And so to let someone go it has different meanings. Literally, you could be on the edge of a cliff holding someone up and then like let go of their hand and you like let them go and they fall. But in this context, to let someone go is a nice way to say to fire someone, usually because of financial reasons, like not because they had a bad performance, I would say, because it's like a nicer way to say it.
Yeah, for sure. The next one is whacking. So I said this when I was talking about the light was just whacking the ceiling during the temblor. And the definition is basically hitting something forcefully and repeatedly.
That made me think of temblor because I feel like some people don't know how to translate that into English. And I usually say like a tremor or a seismic movement, maybe.
Yeah, not exactly an earthquake, but well, it depends on how much experience you have with earthquakes.
Yeah, if you live in a place where they never get earthquakes, they would just call everything an earthquake, to be honest. But
yeah, that like for that example that I'm specifically talking about, everyone in my state would consider that.
Yeah, isn't it like the Scandinavians have a bunch of words for snow? Like there's some Scandinavian language where they have a bunch of words for snow.
Oh, that would make sense.
Because it's like whatever is culturally relevant to you, you're going to have more vocabulary to describe it, I think. Earlier, actually, Layla in the vocab review said that something was like opening a can of worms. And a synonym of that is Pandora's box. So this, if you know the story of Pandora, I know Spanish speakers use the same idiom, but it's a source of endless complications or trouble once opened. So for example, it will open up a Pandora's box of way more problems for you. English speakers tend to use, I think, more the phrase a can of worms. So we have like the two phrases to say the same thing.
To meet in the middle. To meet in the middle is to find a compromise or agree halfway between two different opinions or positions. I think that's a great expression for when you're in a discussion with somebody from a different culture, like for intercultural dating. That's a really good one to use. Like, how can we meet somewhere in the middle?
Yeah, I like it too. Because it also shows we have so many different uses of the word meet. And this is one where like we both kind of come to the middle. Okay, the next one I want to mention because I find that this is one of those words that is very cultural. So it's kind of hard to translate is machismo. So if you are from a Spanish-speaking country, you have heard this word, definitely. It's a strong or aggressive masculine pride, often associated with traditional gender roles in Latin cultures. in the episode, we used it untranslated. So we used it in Spanish, saying there's definitely machismo in Chile, especially among older generations. You'll often find this word untranslated because it's just has this cultural element to it. And it's a very specific concept that even in academic papers and that sort of thing, they won't always translate this type of word when it's, I don't know, just like very, doesn't have a 100% great translation in English. I've heard people say just the patriarchy or chauvinism maybe as other alternatives, but nothing is as common as the Spanish word machismo, I think. I don't know. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I just think that it's very specific in the Latin way. You know, there's, of course, quote unquote machismo, or like you said, it's more of the patriarchy and chauvinism that happens in other cultures. But when we say specifically the word machismo, it really does relate more to...
Yeah, definitely. I feel like we just say sexism when it comes to the US.
Yeah,
that's like
sexism,
a more common word.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really funny because sometimes like Jose will be totally, and I mean totally joking around, but he'll try to say something really like machismo, and I just look at him and I go, wow, how machismo of you. And then we have a good laugh because we know that he's not really saying.
Yeah.
Speaking of gender roles. Gender roles is pretty straightforward. It's cultural expectations about the behaviors and responsibilities of men and women. For instance, legally, women couldn't wear pants for a long time, which is crazy to me.
Definitely. And some women still don't wear pants.
Yeah. No judgment here.
So I don't even remember what we were talking about, but we also mentioned this word creeper, as in there's always going to be the creepers. Creeper is a slang word for someone who behaves in a socially awkward or inappropriate way, often in a romantic or sexual context. So like the guy who, I don't know, responds to all of your stories with like, hey, beautiful. I'm not saying this from personal experience. The guy who like sends you really creepy messages late at night, he would be a creeper. That's a creeper.
Yeah. I think we were talking about this in context of like going out to clubs and having somebody hit on you.
Creeper. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Not necessarily, but sometimes.
Yeah, right. Yeah. More times than not. At least in my experience.
Yeah, it's usually not like I don't know, it's not usually like Zac Efron or something. It's usually like a creeper.
So what you're saying is that you would be totally okay with Zac Efron creeping on you?
I don't know. When I was younger, maybe. I'd be past that.
Right? Right? Oh my God. Well, he's probably old too now. I don't know. My bad is an expression that we say. It's a casual way to admit a mistake or take responsibility. And I think we said, sorry, I'm on autopilot. My bad.
Any final words for this episode?
I would love to hear about other people's intercultural dating stories. And we can always feature them if they're really good. That's just something that is really encouraging to other people who are in those relationships that might be struggling. So it's always good to share.
Definitely. Yeah. And I think also there seem to be people that want to get into intercultural relationships based on our advice episode. One of the questions we got.
Yeah. Yep. It's true. That's it. I think our next episode is going to be on conditionals, hypotheticals. How many ways can we say that?
A very frequent confusion. Unreal situations.
Ooh, yes. Imaginary creations. And I believe that there may be a mention of some kind of contest that we're doing.
Yes. So
you'll just have to listen. And just remember, practice doesn't make perfect.
Intentional and mindful practice makes progress, and that is way more important.